Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Lunch with Leaders session. My name is Tariq Wilkins, and I'm a student ambassador with the University of Memphis Alumni Association. Thank you all for taking your time out of your day to join us. Lunch with Leaders is a virtual series to connect alumni, students, and professionals with industry leaders who share real-world insights to help navigate complexity, align teams, lead with clarity in today's fast-changing environment. Today, we're excited to welcome Dr. Shunji Brown-Woods. Dr. Brown-Woods serves as Vice President of Integration Management at Smith & Nephew, where she leads post-merger planning and enterprise-level integration efforts. In her role, she partners with executive leadership to guide complex strategic initiatives and drive long-term organizational value. With experience across education, healthcare, business, and medical devices, she brings a well-rounded perspective to navigating complexity, managing uncertainty, and leading through change. She is also a proud University of Memphis alumna, having earned her Master's of Healthcare Administration and Doctor of Education. Today, she'll be sharing insights on how leaders can navigate complexity, uncertainty, and drive results in high-stakes environments. At this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Brown-Woods.
Thank you, Tariq. So I'll get my slide sharing, and thank you all for joining and taking an hour of your lunchtime to spend with us as we walk through complexity. One of the first problems as these slides are coming up that I think that I've ever been able to crack is myself. So if you can manage your own complex problem of life, then you can pretty much do anything. So that's kind of the mantra, one of many that I kind of live by. So let's get started. Managing complexity and uncertainty, as Tariq has mentioned, is something that I think a lot of us, we want to understand better. We want to be more comfortable with change and with things being uncertain. And so I hope that by the end of this session, I'll give you a couple of practical examples and ideas as to how you can do that better in your own day-to-day work and potentially within your own personal lives. So this session is grounded in real-world leadership and project experience, particularly integration work that I've done now for the last 4 years at Smith & Nephew, transformation efforts, as well as high ambiguity environments, which a lot of us aren't very comfortable with, but in the current environment that we're kind of existing in today, we have to be more comfortable not knowing what could come next and thinking about creative and alternative ways to approach problems and projects. Whether you're leading M&A like many of my colleagues do, and I support them through integration efforts, or organizational redesign, system improvements, many of the things that we'll talk about today could be practically useful to you in your day-to-day. We'll discuss how to do this again and again, and not just being fixed in our mindsets as to the approach to change and complexity overall. Moving to the next slide. The goals for the session, I won't read everything that's sitting here for you, but there are 3 goals for today. What I'm hoping that we'll walk away with is understanding the importance of guiding principles, how they act as an anchor when you're working through plans, and knowing that things could potentially change. So yes, it's an anchor, but it's not something that's fixed, and you may have to adapt as you go along. We'll also explore managing uncertainty, including introducing a chaos theory that many of you may not be aware of, but it's a leadership practice, and it's also one of the very clear attributes of managing complexity that we need to crack the code to. So we'll talk about that using chaos theory as a lens by which to look at control and or lack of control, if you will. And then thirdly, we'll talk about real world lessons using some of the experiences I've had across the various disciplines that I've worked in, whether it's been education, healthcare, or within the current sector that I'm in now, medical devices in the business development space. So we'll talk about that too. What we'll hope to cover, I hope if you have questions, you can put those in the chat. Someone will be monitoring that throughout. We'll also have ample time at the end, I believe, for questions and answers, and I'll answer to the extent that I can with as many specific examples as possible. We'll also talk about the rapidity of change and how much you can't control for, and how to make sure that you're building contingency plans and alternate points of view as you're working through complexity in your organizations. The objective is to strengthen leadership judgment. This is not a project management 101 course, and I don't want you to leave thinking that, oh my gosh, I was supposed to understand more about project management and how to stage a project. That is not the intent of this course. It's more so about judgment, leadership guidance, and how you apply some of these principles in your day-to-day work. So when we think about managing complexity in projects with clarity and confidence, one of the things that people have tended to give me feedback on is that I tend to lead with strategic clarity. I seek clarity in all things. It may not be consensus. It may not be, authoritative in terms of like how things, this is the thing and this is the only thing that it can be, but I do seek to have clarity across teams. And I think that's one of the really critical points in making sure that when you're working on complex projects, that you understand what it is you hope will be your ultimate outcome, and that you approach that with confidence, knowing that not everything will be as clear-cut as it might seem when you first put it on paper. Going back thus to like the guiding principles that I mentioned, those are anchoring but not necessarily fixed, and you can remove an anchor and reset a new foundation and a new base wherever you might need to. So managing complexity, it doesn't mean that we're eliminating, uncertainty. By no means does it mean that. It means that we're developing confidence to operate with this new set of parameters where change and complexity become more of your norm. And that becomes where you can operate in a place of comfort from that. Leading projects and managing project plans, you have to be adaptable. Clarity is a component to it. It's like building puzzle pieces. And you have to have a strong decision-making framework, which means you really need to have a strong governance approach. Who's in charge? Who's accountable? Where are the owners? If this goes wrong, who's going to fix it? Who's going to ultimately be responsible? A lot of times we don't give enough attention to that, but when you think about clarity over control, you can find a place where effective leadership can exist and actually thrive. Effective leaders, they do not eliminate uncertainty. If anything, they put you more at ease by leading you through it. Confidence comes from the clarity of purpose. Do we know what we're doing and why? And then disciplined decision-making. It takes time to get to a place where you can be decisive in the midst of things that are unknown. Knowing as much as you can know, sometimes that's the goal, right? And the ability to adapt when new information becomes available to you and you don't know if the outcome that you expected is now the outcome that you will achieve. So you have to continue to make adjustment as you're managing through those complexities within projects that you're working on. So when you think about that, people say, oh, well, change for the sake of change is not great. Well, that's true. I mean, there have to be points of stability within any change or any project that you're working through, any concept that needs adjustment. You have to make sure you have a strong foundation. So that means that not all points can be moving at the same time. So there need to be places of stability within whatever project you're approaching. I like to use the Jenga analogy. When you're introducing change, you can't just keep pulling all the blocks without preserving some stability. They'll tumble over. So in complex change, especially integrations in the space that I'm working, many of you might not know, it's like once you are in the M&A space, if you've ever watched Succession, you go, you buy a company or you divest a company, but then you have to stabilize that by integrating into a new configuration with new people, new processes, new products, whatever that may be, and you have to make adjustments. So, and that's complex. So in complex change, especially integrations, not everything should be in motion at the same time. You don't want to break, you want to stabilize. So you need those points of stability where people, process, or decisions don't constantly shift. It's almost like having that North Star. There should be a place that you can point back to. And that allows those new structures to take hold and have a stronger foundation as a result. So when you think about it, stability in interesting change, be an anchor. You have to be thoughtful about what moves and when, who's responsible for which parts of that movement, and then what happens if it doesn't go according to plan. So for example, strong foundations in one integration, leadership, we made early decisions to quickly move on everything, change everything, organization, systems, policies, processes, all at the same time. And what we learned, and this is one of those lessons that you learn as you do the work and you approach things differently and you tailor to the need of the project or the integration in this instance. We learned very quickly that what we didn't do, when we moved everything all at once, we disrupted stability, and it didn't allow us to build the most solid foundation in the places that we needed to. So we had to regroup and go back and do a little bit of maintenance, because we slowed our own decision making down by moving everything too fast. And then you have to go back and reorient yourself to, hold up, what was our ultimate outcome? How do we expect to govern? Who owns this part now that we've kind of disrupted it? What is going to be our anchor point? And how do we restabilize what needs to be put in place so that we can thrive and achieve the outcomes for future state, for the best interest of the organization? So when you do everything too fast, you can affect morale in ways that were unintended. Culture is also potentially impacted as well, and execution can suffer if you don't set appropriate foundations, and also ring fence, if you will, some of the things that must not change versus those things that could sustain some degree of change with minimal disruption or minimal impact overall to your outcomes. When we thought about this and reflecting on it from one integration to another, we've approached new phases of work with a very different approach to say what is going to stay the same and what will change, so that we have an anchoring point at the beginning, kind of built on consensus, so that everyone knows what's going to be important to stabilize, so we can make all the movements around as we would expect. So instead of it being like the puzzle or the Jenga in this instance, it's kind of like the kind of the other games like Hungry Hippo, like let's move the things that we need to do, let's eat those things up to make change, but you have to leave something where you don't totally up the entire base. So the lesson learned there is that change succeeds when we are deliberately preserving few points of stability. When it comes to guiding principles, as I've mentioned a couple of times just in giving an overview, many of us want to start with a project or a problem and we just want to go and fix it. But you don't always need to approach it with, let's just go fix. Solution orientation is great, but you have to be deliberate in how you want to manage those solutions. So if you set guiding principles to guide your work, to guide your team, to guide how it will be governed, you'll be much more successful when it comes to identifying risk and where those are owned and how we're going to mitigate them, as well as having contingency plans in place. And then you can be ready for anything that might come. The guiding principles act as your North Star when there are more questions than you have answers. When you're working with complexity, there are many unknowns. And when you dig deep, you still don't find all the answers. So if you set guiding principles such as, in integration world, I always start with people first. I want to make sure that we are managing in the best interest of people on both sides of the coin. I want to make sure that we are making sure that we're clear about processes and what's going to change and what's not, and how it's going to impact them and what's not. And do we have the right leadership sitting around the table making those decisions, so that we're doing what's in the best interest of our organization at the end of the day, and our stakeholders, and potentially those who invest in the businesses that you are supporting, or in the nonprofit organizations, or in the education arena where you may work and play. So when you have these guiding principles, kind of going back to this one, it helps the team make decisions. If you know what your guiding star, your North Star is going to be, anytime you deviate from that, you're more inclined to come back and say, hold up, wait a minute, let's reset, let's recalibrate. Did we just violate one of the guiding principles we said was going to be important for us to achieve the best outcomes? If so, then you need to go back and say, well, is there another way to achieve the outcome that we expected without causing that level of disruption or being disingenuous, if you will, to the guiding principles that we set? It also puts you in a space where you're pretty much ready for everything. You've got to make sure that you're not leading with panic and managing panic and chaos, versus managing with a very deliberate approach by knowing what you value. And that's another piece of the guiding principles. It kind of helps you to establish, what do you value in the project or in the outcome that you hope to achieve? Many people don't do this part well, like I said, because they see a project, they see a problem, they want to solve it immediately. And so being deliberate in setting the plan, they're not always so keen to do. And I would just caution you that if you do this part right, then you would pretty much be ready for anything. What it does is it helps to facilitate proactive management of risk. It helps to support your contingency planning and adaptability should something change. And it again encourages that ready for anything mindset. When those when uncertainty rises and principles are not followed, we tend to escalate things, and then that may result in actions that were potentially not in the best interest of your overall outcomes that you would achieve. So when you think about that, let's reflect, and some of you can put, notes in the chat, if you will. How many of you worked on a project? It doesn't have to be an integration or a major transition where you didn't set good guiding principles, and what happened? And you can say it in just a couple of words. Did the project flop? Did you have to do a restart, reset? Did relationships get disrupted? What types of things happened? And then if you reflect on a time when you had guiding principles and the project went well, what do you think you could attribute that to? How well did the team work together? What contributed and what were the contrasts in that, in the one or the other? So I'd be interested if you put that in the chat, and then Tarek or someone, if anyone adds anything, if you can just read out one of those examples, because I can't see it from my screen.
Shunji, we haven't gotten anything in the chat just yet.
Okay.
Oh, hang on, let's see. No, not just yet. Go.
All right. So as you're reflecting on that, if you don't have an answer today, I want you to take that away as something that you want to think through. What happens when we don't start with clear guiding principles, and how will we make adjustments for that if we break something? Quite easily stating it that way. And when you're thinking about that, learning from your experience, it's also a point of, I would say, caution and advice. If you are working in complex situations, projects, or with people, even if you're not reflecting, you're not learning, you're not reinvesting back in yourself on how to be better with managing complexity for future processes. And I would say that because a lot of people move on from one project, go right into the next one. They don't do any debrief. They don't do any lessons learned type of work. Reflection is a critical component to getting better and improving your competency in managing complexity and uncertainty, especially in the arenas that we're talking about in business. When you think about that, these questions could help you and a team really think deeper and get better as teams working through complex situations. So that moves us forward to like managing uncertainty, chaos, and change. One of the things that I thought was interesting when I took the job I'm in now, which this month will mark 4 years, it said managing chaos. And I laughed at it when I saw it in the job description. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm taking a job that is deliberately like focused on managing chaos. And at first I didn't understand it, but I was intrigued by it. So of course I'm like, yeah, that's a challenge. I want to do it. And after all the interviews and all the things, I was like, yeah, as I got into the role, I could see where managing chaos was a part of the role, but keeping it at a minimum was my daily challenge, because chaos does not have to fully evolve into reality if you plan well going into a project, and if you also embrace that change is inevitable and that uncertainty cannot be negated. There will be things that you do not know. And so many of us in business and education, healthcare, we want to know exactly the decision that we make. This is the outcome. There's no in between. We don't always do so well with adjusting. So this is where we move from reflection to reality. Taking, like I just said, that debrief mindset, that lessons learned mindset, that starting with some kind of guiding principles that tell you, these are the things that we value. These are the things that I value as a leader, as a member of this team, for this project, for this outcome, for this company. When you get to this stage now where the chaos ensues, how well will you manage your own emotions, as well as how will you show up for those who are relying on you to lead them through that change? So when you think about fast-moving, high-growth environments, mergers and acquisitions is one of those spaces. I would say healthcare is as well, and education too has increasingly become one of those fast-paced environments. Let's move with whatever the trend is, and that trend could be today AI, tomorrow it's more technology for students or less technology for students. The debates abound, but when you think about all of the various spaces that you are living and working in, what are some of those points of change and potential chaos? And then that becomes your reality, and you need to prepare yourself for anything. Be ready for anything mindset. So when you think about chaos management, there is a theory we're going to talk through for just a brief moment, but uncertainty, change, and chaos are not signs of failure. Like a lot of people say, oh, well, if I didn't do this well, I failed. There's a thing called failing forward and failing to get smarter. And when you fail, sometimes you learn the lessons better than if you get it right every time. And so in that, you want to make sure that we are equipped and also giving permission and space for people, for organizations to fail successfully forward by getting better and managing change and chaos. That may not always sit so well with folks because we've been taught to go for the A, get the best score, win at all costs. But sometimes there's no lesson learned in that. You just were good at it, sometimes lucky. But when the stakes are even higher, can you push through and come out on the other end better than you found whatever was in front of you to fix? Not everybody can say that they've done that because they haven't been challenged enough in life, or they're not comfortable enough with failure. So effective leadership begins with acknowledging this reality. Failing is not always bad if you're reflecting, learning, growing, and doing better the next go around. So when you think about where we are, there's this concept called VUCA, or VUCA, where it's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and all of those things coalescing together create this conundrum, if you will, for us to start thinking about business cases and the way we show up in organizations, manage teams, and lead teams. So many of you are likely familiar with the concept. If you're not, we're going to go through it just a little bit. And what's important is not necessarily memorizing the definitions that are here. I can share these slides if anybody wants it, but it's recognizing that in our operating environment, it's unpredictable. At the end of the day, every single one of these things deals with unpredictability. And traditional linear planning, like A to B to C to D, it tells us that, hey, if we're planning linearly, we're not expecting there to be any disruption anywhere along this chain. It's just going to happen as it is. And I tell people, as I started out the top of the call, I am my first project to fix. I'm probably on plan M, K, Z, I don't know, of my life plan. And it did not happen from A to B to C. I had an A to B to C when I moved here and I started school, and I, ended up becoming I'm going to be a doctor. And then I started to go to a different path. And when I started off that path, University of Memphis was there to kind of catch me in my unpredictable state. I realized at that point that I was going to forever live in a place of uncertainty and introduce complexity at every stage and phase of my life and career from that point forward. But it has been a phenomenal journey as I've done that. And it's helped me to open my mind to the possibility of anything happening. And in doing that, it's allowed me to lean into jobs and roles that have nurtured my ability to manage uncertainty. And I thrive in that kind of chaos, if you will. So the chaos management was proper timing for me to end up where I am. But when you see this applied to your business life, projects sitting in front of you today, some of you may have them on your desk, building a new team, establishing new policies and procedures that then you have to cascade to broad groups of people, building a new product line, reshaping a portfolio, or thinking about how you may want to rebrand even a nonprofit organization, which has complexity that many people think running nonprofits is super simple, super easy. It's not. It's also wrought with a lot of these things that we've just talked about here. So traditional linear planning in most of the environments where you live and work and play, they are no longer sufficient. The plan on the page will have many, many, many pieces of disruption. But if you're not honest with yourself, you'll think that it moves from A to B and it's someone else's fault. But if you don't plan for contingency, that really becomes a leader's challenge and something that you'll need to work through. And that's why adaptive leadership is really important. So adaptive leadership helps to address the issues related to unpredictability. If you're not familiar with that concept, you may want to look that up. But volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are a part of our lives. It's a part of our workplaces. And it's something that if you want to become stronger as a leader, you need to really dig deep into understanding adaptive leadership principles. Leaders have to adapt to how we assess information, make decisions, and enable your teams under those conditions. We have to make space for teams to work in an unpredictable environment. And we have to give them tools and resources and expose them to different ways of thinking to manage that uncertainty. And so when you put that all in perspective, it's like maintaining line of sight as to what could happen. If you know what could happen to some extent, like the sky is falling, what do you do to keep the sky falling? Well, you need to come up with some mitigation plans. Do you have your eye focused and on the right levels of detail in the right spaces to be able to address whatever the issue could be? We don't typically do well with risk. We can call them out, but we don't typically understand how we can mitigate them. We're like, oh, it could happen, but that's not going to happen in this case. We tend to roll over it pretty quickly. But what I'm asking, and what this intent of talk is to help encourage, is that you identify risk, much like with failure. What happens if, and you dig deep into, then if this happens, we must do or take this approach or have this recourse. If you don't plan and you fail to plan, anything that disrupts you will make you have to go that much harder to fix it. So it's better to plan on the front end, put the time in, have the conversations, think about the what ifs, and then be ready for anything. If you maintain a line of sight of what could happen, that is a part of your leadership responsibility. When you acknowledge uncertainty early, you can protect people, you can manage the process, the cost more efficiently, you could preserve value in whatever it is that you're hoping to achieve, and you can stay focused on reaching your ultimate goal because you've thought through all the things that could go wrong in a more deliberate, intentional way, but also one that shows that you lack the fear of paralysis in decision making because you're willing to go deep into not just what happens when it's good and when we win, but what happens when we don't and how do we fix it and recover. Okay. Which then lends itself to the discussion on risk management. You know, there are different types of risk in projects. There are different type of risk in the environments where we work. You know, we might have a risk management discipline that looks at it in a more strategic way and a cost-based way, and you know, from an insurance perspective. But even in a project that's not going to be like you wrecking your car, there's still financial, reputational, operational risk that you have to consider. And here's a tough question: do we generally discuss risk? I don't think we do. Or do we document them? Sometimes we don't, because we don't assume or don't want to believe that they could really happen. So we just move on from it. And then when it emerges, we're like, oh man, I thought about that, but didn't build a plan for it because I did not really think it would happen. So, you know, blind spots occur because we don't have the conversation with any depth on what happens if this risk actually does show up. How and when does it become an issue? What problems will it produce or cause downstream, and how far off target to our outcome will it take us because we didn't acknowledge it? Even cultural risk. What happens if this team, when I'm thinking about integration, what happens if we don't bring this team together? What happens if HR or any of the other functions don't bring the benefits in alignment? What happens if this? So there's just this list of what ifs. And luckily, I like that kind of stuff. Not everyone does. And so, you know, for me, I thrive. For you, think about what your tolerance is for managing risk. But I would encourage you to go deeper if you're not, because getting this part right can save a lot of heartache, pain, and dollars sometimes for you and your organizations. And it gets the elephant out of the room. If you don't do it right on the front end, it'll resurface and it'll come back as an issue and it might cost you more. So go from awareness to action. You know, how are the risks identified or assessed? Here again, you know, from this deck, you can take a few of the questions if you don't have good guiding questions to ask along the way for like setting your guiding principles, understanding, you know, what needs to change, what doesn't, understanding how to assess risk, and reflecting on what's gone well and what hasn't. This is an opportunity to do that. So this chaos management theory, intentionally I make this slide crazy so that you feel as crazy as I do sometimes, but the information there is really just straightforward. It's an actual theory. It reminds us that complex systems don't always behave predictably, and that's okay. And that's not a failure of leadership or of planning. The key ideas is that things don't always happen in a straight line. They could be all over the place, and that's okay. And when we manage chaos, things tend to self-organize and reshape themselves to be more cohesive, if you will, as long as you're addressing all of the various components within. And then, something so small can actually impact really hugely. So it also makes sure that you say, like, the size and scale doesn't necessarily amount to the amount of impact it might have. So if you think about everything, if you build contingency, if you recognize and appreciate that chaos is inherent in many of the complex projects that we, are touching, then you'll become more comfortable having those conversations and leading from a lens of what happens if this contingency thinking, if you will. So it highlights that complex systems, again, like I said, are not linear. They are adaptive, and disproportionate impacts can be made. Then the question is, what will you do about it? So chaos prevention or chaos management, you decide. Just kind of leaving that there for you. That's a pivot point. It's also a leadership decision, and strong leaders don't, they don't shirk away from, am I okay to lean into chaos and manage it, or should I prevent it? And many of the things I've talked to here to now are preventative, so that when and if it comes, you're managing things that needed to be managed or that you place in your mitigation strategy for the what ifs and the contingencies if they were to occur. So when you think about behavior that's so unpredictable, it seems random, like complete disorder and confusion. I'm sure many of you can point to at least one or two instances in the last 4 or 5 months where you've approached something at work and it was just like, oh my gosh, I did not expect this to become that. It's kind of like that ball up there in the corner where it's like this big jumble of things, and it's still the same amount of thread, but it's just been reorganized. So that's that self-organization piece. When you start digging in, understanding that change is inevitable, understanding that uncertainty is not something that you'll have all the knowns for, you can help your organization self-regulate. You can bring forth those adaptive leadership characteristics that are more productive in this type of environment. And you then start to work through the feedback loop, kind of the debriefing. What have I learned? If we failed here, what do we do to fix it? And then you can also think about what relationships and connections are important to maintain some stability moving forward throughout the journey of whatever that complex project or problem is that you're trying to solve. And then where you can see that chaos theory applied in management, you see it with strategic planning. It's like you just throw everything up and figure out where it lands. And now what do we want to focus on? You can see it when you put together leaders in a room and you're really wanting to get at leadership styles and how those gel together. And you hear people talking about like the EQ of leaders or the strengths finders and where you fit and how, what are your profile characteristics, or even Myers-Briggs, pulling all of that together. Sometimes the chaos of having various styles of leadership actually lends itself to really well operated organizations because they blend. The cohesion of that varied and diverse backgrounds and leading can actually bring strengths. And when you think about project management and change management and team dynamics, all of those are application spaces where chaos and behaviors are really unpredictable because each person brings their own mix, that you can thrive and you can apply everything that I've just shared in the space of management where you might be leading. So some takeaways as I now wrap up. When you think about projects, you want to start with, a good case. Why are we doing this? What do we hope to get? That's that foundational stuff. What are the guiding principles? What needs to change? What's not? Are we going to be deliberate and focused on the uncertainty and unpredictability of the work? And then what contingencies can we put in place? What risk might emerge? How do we mitigate those? And then how do we accept that volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are inevitable, as well as chaos to a degree? And then I've provided some resources that we can share with everyone after, if you'd like those. And then I will like to say thank you again, University of Memphis Alumni Association, for inviting me to share my insights and handing it back over to Tariq. So thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Brown-Woods, for your insight. I found a lot of value as you were going through this presentation. And so now we'll move on to our Q&A portion of today's session. We have received several questions in advance, so thank you to everyone who submitted those questions ahead of time. So starting off with our first question, it was asked by Catherine White. She asked, how do you manage a complex project when you're brought in extremely late? And how do you recover a project that has gone awry and not has gone as planned?
So it's two questions in one, so I'll take it in parts. So One of the things about working in mergers and acquisitions, there's a lot of pre-work that goes into setting up what we might see as a target for purchase. And I'm not always sitting at the table with my colleagues when they're making those decisions. So I'm brought in late and I have to be, one, not feeling some kind of way about that. I think a lot of times our ego gets in the way with leadership and you're like, hey, if I'm responsible for bringing it over the line, why was I not included? You have to manage your ego. That's point one. And you have to understand that there's a time and a place for everything. And sometimes your time is not at the beginning. But when you're tapped to be involved, be ready. Be ready for anything. That goes back to the uncertainty component. And lean in using your full scope, breadth of expertise to do the absolute best job you can, because that's your time to do that work. And when you're brought in, don't fret over, oh my gosh, I feel behind. You acknowledge, thank you for bringing me in at the time that you did. I now need to spend some time understanding and briefing myself on where you all are. I might have some questions. Who has time to give me the overview that I need so that I can be most impactful to this work going forward? And you let it go and you move on. You choose your battles. You don't let that be your fight. The second part of that question, repeat that for me, Tariq.
Second part of the question is, how do you recover a project that has gone awry or not as gone as planned?
Yeah, so most projects don't go as planned. So I start with that as my frame of reference. Most projects do not go as you expect them to, because this is not utopian. So if you accept that as your starting point, a project is likely to go awry because, as we just said in the slides, it's a nonlinear process. So if you're willing to adapt to the fact that not all projects are written and will have the outcome that's intended along that continuum, then you figure out where was the break point, what decisions got made or didn't get made that needed to be made, and you work yourself back to that and you fix everything you can from that point forward, knowing that it still may take you on a different journey even from the original plan. But if you can resolve it, get to an outcome that's favorable for you, your organization team, then you've accomplished the goal. And you then make that become your lessons learned. And you look at root cause analysis for like, what could we have done differently so that it wouldn't have derailed at that point? And we could have had a better outcome earlier rather than having to deviate from the initial plan.
Okay. We can move on to the next question. Next question is from Grace John. How do you manage complex projects under constant shifting leadership or priorities are always changing?
Well, that's an interesting one because I've been with the company I'm with now for 10.5 years. I've had 8 bosses in that time. And so that means that I'm pretty adaptable to change in leadership. And if you are steady and stable, remember I said one thing has to remain stable. So I have to remain true to who I am, my values, my approach to leadership and projects. Things around me can change. I can't control for that. All I can do is maintain stability within that one frame. If I do that consistently, and if people are able to rely on me as the person who executes and gets things done, I don't care that the leadership is changing. As long as I'm clarifying, going back to the very top of the slides, clarifying versus worrying about control. If I clarify what the ultimate outcome was intended to be, we can achieve the outcomes that we collectively decide upon with the new leadership that's in place with the least amount of disruption or, again, ego. You have to be really careful with that when you're managing projects in business and organizations.
That was very insightful.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to Brenda Parton. How can you keep your team motivated and engaged when there is project uncertainty?
I think with that one, because projects come and go, but the other point to that too, I think to raise is that some projects never end. And if it is a project, it has a start date and an end date, okay? And there's project uncertainty and resets that happen frequently in organizations as strategy changes and things like that. What you've got to do to maintain the morale of the team is acknowledge their contributions to the current project at hand. If something shifts, then the shift of priorities, people need to be transparent and share what's happening and why, because there's a lot of effort that goes into mobilizing teams to manage various aspects of that project. And so you need to just, like I said, be honest about that, acknowledge and show value for what has been accomplished, recognize the areas of expertise that people have lended to the project, but keep them apprised of like what the ultimate outcome is. Something we'll pick back up. Are we just totally closing it because now the outcome is a different one that's needed based on leadership or the environment or the trends in the industry, things like that. But I think communication is probably the most important piece of that, and acknowledging people's worth and value to the project itself.
All right, moving on to a question that Tiara Starks asked. How do I manage complexity in projects where I don't receive adequate support to troubleshoot or remove barriers that delay timelines? And there's a follow-up question that reads, how do I ask for help on a task I am doing for the first time without diminishing my credibility?
Okay, so let's start with that one. So one, typically, if you're a project manager, you're not expected to be a subject matter expert for the project that you're working on. So you have to be open again, and that transparency, I think it's important too, to say, hey, I may ask some questions that might seem novice, but remember, I don't do what you do, but I manage projects really well. Like that's where my skill set is, right? So I can help you manage that if I know all these things. So the questions I may ask may seem, very simple, but there's a reason for it. So to the extent that you build relationships with the project sponsor or the project partners or people who are within, and let them know that you are not intended to be the subject matter expert, and by the time you finish, you hope that they help equip you to be, then you might find that people are more willing to share and help you learn their piece while you're also transferring to them some of the project management skill set that they need to be able to manage projects. Because a lot of times people get brought in to manage projects because they're great organizers or they're a project manager, but project management should be in everybody's scope of work. You should all know how to do it to some extent. The other part to that is when you don't have all the right resources and troubleshooting is needed, and those components are not being met for you. You have to be willing to document. One, you have to document everything you have or don't have, and you also have to document impact statements, right? If I have this, this would become the outcome. If I'm lacking these things, this is what might be impacted, and to this extent. If I have a need for X, what will be our protocol for receiving support for these 3 or 4 things? But it goes back to the risk management that we were talking about earlier. If you identify the risk and if you don't have all the resources, you are inevitably potentially going to fail, right? So if people care about the project, they have to invest behind it, put the best people behind it. They're going to have to give you the financial resources, and they're going to also have to give you appropriate tools to manage it to completion for the duration of that time period that's set. If the deadlines and timelines are thrown off because they haven't adequately supported it, then everyone has to acknowledge that as one of the limitations very early when you're setting that clarity. If this is not met in this way, we agree that there may be deviations and a default in this way unless we invest appropriately. And that's just holding people accountable from the outset. That help answer?
I hope it was helpful to the person who asked the question.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. We have a question from LaJoyce Harris.
Okay.
How should the work of a project be summarized upon completion? And how do you ensure a smooth transition and sustainability after a project wraps up?
So I'm going to introduce BAU. So business as usual in our space. When a project is concluding, it needs to have a home. So who's going to own the success in the future, like health of the project, and kind of like that hypercare mindset? So when you're closing a project, one, there should be a formal project closure that says, this is what we said we would do, this is what's been accomplished, this is what's left to do, this is who's going to own finishing those pieces out. And now, as business as usual, these are the functions, departments, or people responsible for ensuring sustainability of what we've just put in place. So it's almost charter led with exits of those charters, so that everyone who needs to know is held accountable to managing going forward. So there are tools for that.
All right. The next question is from Francesca Brandt. Do you have any suggestions on how to approach a colleague at the same level regarding work habits like delegation, setting deadlines, or perfectionism, especially when your support doesn't seem to be landing?
Yeah, I think you have to do that tactfully. But if you have good guiding principles, and or good norms around how to call out, opportunities for improvement. It's one, you can call it a critique, you can call it feedback, but it depends on what's safe in your environment to do that, right? So, for me, if I see someone holding on to something a bit too tight, I may be like, hey, you can increase your productivity by delegating more because this is kind of, outside of your scope, or we're supposed to be helping to grow talent and skill and knowledge in these ways with other people. So be willing to share the work. Everyone gets the credit, but that's a mindset shift. I think sometimes we offer feedback to colleagues and it's not well received because of, again, as I mentioned earlier, ego is in the way. But if you truly are a person who cares about continuous improvement, getting better at what you do, showing up, well in what you do, you will give that feedback as transparently, honestly as you can. Um, but you'll also request additional feedback on yourself so that it's a bi-directional thing. It's not you telling, it's receiving an opportunity as well for you to improve yourself. So I think if you approach it that way with the right type of tone, it will be received fairly well, at least reflected upon and received.
Okay. Moving on to a question from Michelle Rice. How can I grow as a leader while balancing entrepreneurship and advancing within an organization?
Um, you got to be deliberate. You have to manage your time. You have to be clear on what you want your ultimate outcome to be, noting that it could change, right? Like I'm literally what I would classify as an accidental leader. I am not sitting in the seat that I expected to be sitting in for my career. I've also done a lot of things all at the same time. So like even while I work full time for the organization that I'm in, I also teach part-time in the evenings in an MBA program, and I coach sometimes because I feel like there's, if somebody feels my voice might help them do something and they call me and I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I serve. But I believe that you can do that as long as you balance well. When people ask me like, what's the most important job I have? It's first being a wife and a mother to 3 kids, and having the support of a partner to do that. So my situation may be very different from someone else who's seeking to be entrepreneurial while also working in a corporate environment and growing and kind of climbing the ladder. I do believe, though, that somewhere in that mix, the climb will become less important for you, and some of those other kind of exploits will become more interesting, and you can lean into those in different ways. So it's about timing, it's about bandwidth, it's about honesty with what can you manage, and it's about trying to do a lot of things well and not half doing it because people can tell when you're not showing up fully. So you have to show up fully in every space that you're present in for that moment. And then sometimes you have to step back because you can't do it all. But doing it all is a goal, and some people achieve it and they make it look easy. If you want it, go for it. It's possible.
Thank you again for the insight. We are moving on to our last pre-submitted question.
Okay.
Apologies in advance if I mispronounce the name, but the question comes from Samani Mal. Ooh, let me attempt this again. Samani Mohal Bauzadi. How do you navigate job market uncertainty?
That's a loaded question because right now the job market is very uncertain for many, especially for new grads and even for job changes and folks over 40, right? And women. So that's pretty much everybody. So job uncertainty, I think, is about making sure that you have skills that are transferable. There's no longer the time where you train for one thing. You have to train to be many things and have to have skills that allow you to dab in different areas of interest, and be willing to reshape who you are from a career perspective, but also don't be title hungry with job uncertainty. I know that sounds crazy, but like sometimes you've got to be willing to take the title change while money may not change, or understanding the market, know what your skill set will allow you to do, and know what you want to do and figure out where the matches are. And be bold, ask questions, get curious about what other people do, lean into networks, test people who say, if you need me, I'll be there for you. See if they will actually help you, but be bold. Uncertainty, I think, is a part of the career game anyway. I've been here now 10 and a half years. My prior job, I'd been there for 8.5. And prior to that, I'd done a lot of different things. I've worked since I was 12. So I think it's job market uncertainty is also tied to mindset certainty. So if you know you want to do something, you will find something to do. And you can be successful at it. It can bring income to you. And then you just need to live within your means while you look for the next thing.
Can I ask how this strategy would shift if we were looking at it from the lens of a recent college graduate or college student that's about to graduate?
Yes, don't be picky. Your degree will get you entry into many different spaces, but not always what you thought it was going to be. So, if you go in and you say, I have to go in not entry level because I have X degree, because some new college grads are coming straight out with their master's degrees with limited job experience, you might have to start at an entry level role. And it might slightly be outside of the discipline that you trained for because they're looking at skill sets. So be open-minded. Again, be bold, ask questions, sometimes seek the alternative path to get to the path you really want, but don't assume that just because you have your degree, it's going to be easy. You got to put some work into it. And I think this generation is a little bit different than mine, where we had to show grit to get indoors. And you guys have come through a very different time where so much has been placed in front of you with a lot of opportunities. And now you have to find the grit to potentially work for it because your intelligence can only take you so far.
Thank you for that. All right, now we are going to take a few additional questions from the chat.
Okay.
So, Shunji, we have a question from Tara Jones. She says, Shunji, when you face uncertainty, change, and potential chaos in projects or with teams, how do you press forward with decision making and action when you don't have all the information? And I think you may have touched on this. She also says, thank you for being an outstanding alumni and being our Lunch of Leaders speaker.
Awesome. Thank you. I touched on it a little bit, and I think first you got to take the deep breath because you're just like, oh my gosh, like I've got to go fix this thing. Like, am I going to always be the one that's tapped to fix? But if you enjoy the challenge, it's like unpicking a puzzle and figuring out how to reshape it. You might have to trim a couple of pieces to make them fit a little bit better the next go round, but you have to open your mind to doing that. And sometimes when people are reaching to you to do the fixing or manage the complexity and uncertainty, they have faith in your abilities to do that because you may take an alternate view that others cannot. And so they want a diverging point of view to help reshape the trajectory of that project. So look at it as an opportunity, less of an imposition. Yes, sometimes it's hard, but doing the hard work gets visibility in other ways, and it helps to strengthen your skill set.
Okay, thank you for that response. And our final question comes from Ms. Shauna Bateman. Her question is, what was your favorite or most meaningful accomplishment in leading a project or leading change? And what was your takeaway from that accomplishment?
Oh, wow. I think there are a lot of them. I'm one of those folks that's kind of hard to please, unfortunately. So when I do it and I finish it, I never feel like it's good enough. So Shauna, I have to start by prefacing it with that. Like, I don't ever feel like I've done enough or if it's good enough. So I'm constantly looking for that next kind of high accomplishment. I would say we bought a company a couple of years ago, and it was a tough one because there was geopolitical unrest and some other things going on. And we were able to bring that team in. There were about 30 people and keep them safe and bring that product in and do all the things that we expected to do from a milestone perspective, right? From an integration perspective, we achieved what we expected to do. Now, I will say that, there's still opportunity for us in terms of like how it can change standard of care and all those various points within the healthcare space for knee repair and things like that. But I would say that that's one accomplishment because that was the first integration that I was able to lead from end to end, being a part of diligence all the way through to closing out the integration and getting it to BAU. There are others across that spectrum. I would say very early in my career, when I, just for those who don't know, I dropped out of medical school after 3.5 years, and I was like, oh my gosh, what will I do with my life? How will I actually make an impact and be able to pay off all these student loans? And I came to University of Memphis with a plea to say, like, hey, my plan C now is to obtain my master's in health administration. And I was able to do that as a graduate assistant. And Dr. Paul Fitzgerald at the time gave me the opportunity to enter the program with like 3 weeks to admission. I was able to obtain a graduate assistantship at St. Francis Hospital. And when I was there, they didn't just have me doing menial tasks. They let me get in and do throughput studies. And I was able to build out projects that would allow us to evaluate how long people sat in the ER. And I was doing chart management and review and all the stuff. So I was using all the skill that I gained through medical school, being able to apply it in health administration. And then when it was time for us to open the St. Francis Bartlett Hospital, I was like employee number 3 after the CEO and the administrator, because I demonstrated my ability to, one, be very process oriented, but 2, understand the ways of working. And I was hired in as a hospital, educator, clinical analyst, and did a lot of work to help onboard and open that new hospital and see it go from the ground up, even down to picking what the door signs and things would look like. And that was at like the age of 27. So like University of Memphis was pivotal in helping me make a pivot. As I said, I was my first complex project. What do you do when failure looks like it's the next option? I didn't fail, I fell forward, and Memphis picked me up, and it put me into the place where I am today, where a lot of the projects that I've been able to lead is because of things that I learned there through my journey of getting a health administration degree, getting my leadership and policy doctorate there, and applying that into the workspaces where I've been, from the hospital to the school district, and now Smith and Nephew. So I'm grateful for that. And I think those are probably my greatest accomplishments, actually getting to use everything I've learned and continuing to learn and give back whenever I can. Hope that answers the question, Shauna. That's it.
Wow. All right, well, I am going to close our session today. Thank you, Dr. Brown-Woods, for your insight with us today. We truly appreciate your time and perspective. And thank you to everybody who joined us for today's session. We hope you found it valuable and engaging. A survey and recording of today's webinar will be shared for this event. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. And please join us for our next Lunch with Leaders session.